A Karen buys the property next to my family's house and tries to destroy our orchard and cut off my cat's tail, so I destroy her life and cause her to lose that property, along with $437,000 worth of debt. Here is how I got my sweet revenge. My great-grandparents planted an orchard. It is now at least 120 years old. My grandparents and my parents were really proud of the peach trees growing in it and did their best to keep them in good health. Well, we always threw a big party when the peaches were ready to be harvested and invited all of our friends and neighbors to it. I love those parties. The neighbors on the property to the south of our orchard were particularly fond of our peaches. They were a bunch of fine old people, and me and the old man Sam were pretty good friends. He taught me a lot about woodworking with hand tools only, and we had some great evenings in his workshop. We finished many a good whiskey in there together. In return, he got a lot of fine peaches, marmalade, homemade peach liqueur, etc. Sadly, he died a good 10 years ago. Cancer is terrible. His wife followed soon after. Many suspected it was of a broken heart. They had no kids, so all of their property was left to the States, except his tools and his whiskey collection, which he had gifted me a few weeks before he died. In comes Karen. The name speaks for itself, the haircut, the attitude, the overall full personality, the whole deal. She bought the property off my late neighbors. We hadn't had the kind of money to buy it at the time, as we met some dire straits the years before, and all of our savings were gone. The first thing she did before she actually moved in was go around and make demands of the neighbors on the surrounding properties. When it was finally our turn to listen to her gibberish, she told us that we needed to remove half of the trees as the leaves were blowing onto her property. We told her in a plain way that we won't comply with her demands, as the orchard is a vital part of our family heritage/tradition and has been for at least 120 years. She was pissed but did nothing for the time being. There are some things you need to know before I continue with the story. The workshop that I mentioned before was situated right at the border to our property. It was a small timber frame building at least 160 to 180 years old. The regulations in my state are pretty strict concerning old structures. Every structure over 100 years is protected, and you need special permission to tear it down. Failing to get this permission can lead to a hefty fine. To get the permission to build a new building, it has to be up to code, and you have to ask your surrounding neighbors, but if they agree, you're good to go. Except there is one specialty in my country: you have to keep a certain distance to the border of the property to allow emergency services full access to your property. If one of these requirements isn't met, the building is illegal or at least only partially legal and can be actually ordered by a court to be torn down. This might come in handy later. So, back to my Karen. After our first encounter with her, she did her best to pester the whole neighborhood. She got the neighbor's dog put down because he allegedly attacked her brats. It later turned out that she faked the attack that got the neighbor's dog put down. This dog was the sweetest and most innocent dog you could imagine, a Bernese mountain dog, big but a real teddy bear. Anyway, she later got us to stop doing our annual peach parties as she called the police every time for various reasons: noise complaints, we had a band playing there in the afternoon, arson, we lit a fire in a designated fire pit in the middle of our property. She called the ATF on us for allegedly making moonshine. My dad had a license to distill for our own consumption. In short, she was a real pain in the butt, and after 3 years, we decided it wasn't worth it to deal with various officers and law enforcement agencies every time we threw a party. We decided to quit. After she had reached this goal, she resorted to pestering us to remove the orchard. We didn't cave in, and some of our things started getting really fishy. Somehow, The tires of our trucks got slashed, eggs got thrown on our farmhouse, our cat disappeared and resurfaced days later in rough condition. It looked like somebody had tried to cut off his tail. Don't worry, he healed up completely, but we actually couldn't prove that she did all of that. Then came the day when she made her biggest mistake. She had a company come in sort of a secret operation and tear down the old woodworking workshop overnight. 2 days later, they started building a big garage, recreational center house right where the shop was. But she missed one fine detail, which got pretty important later on. She did not ask our permission nor the neighbors. After a short while, the trees right next to her property started to get sick. The leaves turned brown in the middle of summer, and the branches started to die. We lost 4 trees right before we figured out what the cause was. Somebody had driven long copper nails into them. We had a suspicion but couldn't prove it, so we put up some trail cameras, perfectly legal as it was on our own property, and we caught her red-handed. My dad confronted her, she apologized, and my dad, being the way too nice guy he is, wanted to let her get off the hook. But not me. The nail she drove into our oldest tree was the final nail in her coffin. I started to investigate. I had some friends at the administration of our county and asked them to do some inquiries. It turns out that she didn't apply for the permission to tear down the old shop, nor for the permission to build the new building. I did some further inquiries on the borderline of our property. It turned out the old markers vanished over time, and her building was about 3 feet on our property without our permission. After I had gathered all this information, I presented it to my parents. At first, they were reluctant, as they didn't want to start a neighborhood clash. But after I recalled all the things she did to us and our neighbors, and possibly our cat, they were in. So, let the games begin. First, we called the authorities on her for tearing down a protected building and presented them with all the evidence we gathered. Then we called the building's authorities on her for building a building without permission, not up to code, and not only did she not keep the required distance on the property border, she also built on our property without our permission. Long story short, it turned out the workshop hadn't only been protected because of its age, but also because it was a historical landmark which played a vital role in the conflict back in the 1860s. She got sued for this and had to pay a fine of $150,000. Am I the fool for dropping a guy I was dating and his daughter off at a rental car place states away from home? Long story short, I'm a 27-year-old female. I started seeing a 44-year-old guy named Dave 3 years ago. I have 2 sons, 9 and 6, and he has 1 daughter who's 17 years old. I booked a road trip for me and my sons roughly 3 months ago, a road trip consisting of roughly 26 hours worth of driving with stops in between. This is the first time I've ever been financially able to do much of anything with my children, so I went all out. I planned to stop at every place they had ever asked me to go. Basically, I was beyond excited to surprise them with this trip. We got home 4 nights ago. A week before leaving, Dave decides he wants to go with me and bring in as a bonding experience. We do not live together, and it has never liked me because I'm boring. She has said this to my face, so Dave thinks it will all be good. I didn't really want either of them to go, but I thought, why not? This could be good for us. Boy, was I wrong. From the moment Ann got into my vehicle, she started complaining about absolutely everything. It was too crowded, too loud, we were taking too many stops, the boys were too annoying and needed to quiet the F down and chill out. We get a hotel 9 hours into Pennsylvania. It's around 3 p.m. at this point. Dave asks if he can take a drive with Ann because she was getting irritated with the kids. I told him he could if he makes it quick because I needed to get dinner supplies. 3 hours later, he shows back up. Him and went out to eat. So, I made a comment saying, "You didn't think that we wanted to eat too," and then snaps back with, "I don't think we asked." After comments like this for days, I finally snapped. My boys are now saying they just want to go home because several times Dave told my kids to be quiet because of his kids' level of comfort. At this point, I haven't done anything with my kids because the Queen would have a fit if we pulled off anywhere, and Dave at this point basically refused to let me drive, despite me arguing in my car. So, I snapped and I told him to pull the F over. When he finally does, I drive to the nearest car rental and I tell them to get the F out of my car. Dave and then start flipping out and say she isn't going to get into a car that has bed bugs, and Dave says he didn't want to take separate vehicles and didn't have enough money for a rental because the Queen spent over $1,500 in 4 days. So, I say I don't believe I effing asked, and I take off. We were close to 800 miles from home. It took them 4 days to get home due to a lack of money and needing to borrow money. Now, I'm being told I'm a selfish bee. Am I the fool? It sounds like Dave is under Anne's thumb, and maybe he's trying to do that because he's in some sort of weird situation with Anne or a custody issue. But it sounds like he's complying with whatever Anne wants and is imposing that reality on everyone around them, regardless of who it makes uncomfortable. Obviously, in retrospect, the best thing would have been to say no, you can't come. This trip is specifically for me and my boys. We've been planning this for a long time. But with all that said, let me know what you would do if you're in this situation, fool or not a fool. Am I the fool for blowing up on my husband for lying to me about my sister and her baby leaving when he actually kicked her out? My sister, who's 20 years old, got out of a terrible relationship and moved in with me and my husband and brought her 5-month-old son. She's been dealing with a handful of issues, from PPD to depression. I asked my husband if he'd be okay with her moving in, and he said absolutely not. Just this, but he was the one who picked her up / brought her home. She stayed for 2 weeks, and he helped her around the house. My husband started complaining about the baby crying, but a newborn baby is expected to cry, especially at night. He said it causes him stress, although I suggested he put on earbuds. He suddenly told me to forget it, and so I did. Last week, I had to go out of town to attend a friend's funeral without my husband. He said he wanted to stay with my sister to make sure she's okay. I returned home the next day and didn't find her or her baby home. My husband said she contacted a friend in another town and wanted to move with them and left that morning. He handed me a letter he claimed was from her. This felt so odd, especially after reading the letter. I called her phone many times, but it turned out my husband found it and said she must have left it behind. I was worried, and I had no means of contacting her to make sure she was okay. I contacted relatives, but they knew nothing. Yesterday, I got a call from an unknown number, and it was her. We talked, and she told me that she didn't leave on her own, but my husband kicked her out after telling her she was no longer welcome and she needed to take responsibility for her decisions. I was in shock as she explained she's not with the friend but at a shelter, and she has no money. I waited until he got home, and I blew up at him. He admitted he faked the letter, he hid her phone, and then argued that it's his house and he has a say, but he shouldn't have lied to me about my sister and caused her to be homeless. He said I was being unfair and wrong to lash out at him for wanting peace in his home. I went upstairs and refused to argue anymore. I told him I'm going to pick her up tomorrow. And then he said he'd change the locks while I'm gone, so I wouldn't be allowed to bring her home. I'm thinking of going to a hotel, but he kept saying I'm letting my sister affect our lives by prioritizing her. But there's a baby involved, my nephew, and I cannot leave him homeless. I get that it's a house too, but I don't see why he's so against her staying. Fast forwarding into the future, he returned home, and we started arguing again. I couldn't take it anymore. I'm going to stay at a hotel for tonight, and I'm leaving in an hour or so. He is wanting to talk again now, but I'm incredibly overwhelmed and stressed out and need some time by myself. I don't care if he's going to change the locks or not. I'm working on meeting up with my sister as soon as possible so we could try to talk more openly about what happened and hopefully try to figure something out. So was I the fool for blowing up on my husband for lying to me about my sister and her baby leaving when he actually kicked her out? This husband sounds so slimy. Not only did he wait for the OP to be out of town so that she couldn't do anything about it, he stole the sister's phone so she couldn't contact the OP. I mean, that is really twisted. The perplexing part is if the husband felt that he so clearly has the right to do this, why wouldn't he just do it in front of the OP in the open? He did it in a very sneaky, roundabout way. And then what do you think was gonna happen? Of course, she's gonna contact her sister eventually and figure this out. So he had no plan, he just thought, I'll get the baby and the sister out of the house for now, and then, I'll figure it out later. The husband doesn't sound very smart or confident in his ability to actually be the one to make decisions in the household, otherwise, he wouldn't have done this under the cover of night. He would have done it right out in the open. So if this was your significant other, and they did this to your sibling, let me know how you would take it, and fool or not a fool, and why. And don't forget to subscribe to Am I the Fool on YouTube and hit that bell to turn on notifications. And if you're a fan of podcasts, make sure you follow the Am I the Fool podcast as well. Either way, thanks a lot for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time.